Almost 15 years ago, Marquette Law School, with the arrival of Mike Gousha, began doing a series of public policy programs focusing on interviews with interesting and important people. About 10 years ago, frankly, after I arrived, I'm Alan Borsuk, I should say. I'm part of the team here at the law school. We added education to the programs that we do. And even in this past year now, we've been doing our best to do these virtually, and it's been quite successful. So I'm glad to welcome all of you here today for what I am confident is a very important and timely conversation about the state of education and the situation for students nationwide and in the Milwaukee area. We're going to do this in two parts. First, I do want to thank the Marquette Law School and the Lubar Center for Public Policy and Civic Education for sponsoring this, and the Marquette College of Education for sponsoring this. Without the support of our leaders, we wouldn't have conversations like this, so we're appreciative. We're going to do this in two parts. First, I'm going to be speaking with Robin Lake from the Center on Reinventing Education at the University of Washington. And then second, Mike Gousha will be talking with several significant leaders of schools in the Milwaukee area about how their schools are doing this year. Let me introduce Robin. She is the director of the center. The center was founded in 1993 by a gentleman named Paul Hill, who I might add was a speaker at one of our sessions here at the law school in 2014, and is still involved and such. But Robin became director of the center in 2012. She has bachelor's and master's degrees in public affairs, education, and urban policy from the University of Washington. And she is just a plain smart and knowledgeable observer of the national scene. I've been trying to follow what's going on for the last year, all of this tumult. We're coming up on the first anniversary of the nationwide closing of schools. And the things that have been coming out of the Center on Reinventing Education are just really thorough, well-grounded, and informative. And including they've started an effort called the Evidence Project, which is keeping an eye on things. And we're just going to talk here for a little bit about what she has seen going on nationwide. So let me introduce Robin Lake, and I'll begin with a kind of an open question of how are students doing in the broad picture nationwide? And by that, I mean both academic performance and engagement.
Well, thanks, Alan. It's so good to join you. I've been an admirer for a long time. So how are the kids doing? I think every parent knows that, if you've got a kid at home, even if you've got a kid attending school part-time right now, they're suffering to some degree. It's been jolting. There's been a lot of social isolation. I've got a couple of teenagers at home who, this is a tough time for teenagers. So we know that across the board, this has been tough. And that's been especially true for low-income students, students of color, kids with disabilities, name any historically marginalized group of kids. And they had a lot of barriers that they faced pre-pandemic. All of those barriers have just been exacerbated through lack of technology, et cetera. So, what are we seeing in terms of challenges and the indicators of well-being? Well, there is no doubt that by any measure, looking at rates of anxiety, depression, suicide rates, all of the indicators of just emotional well-being are up for kids. And again, especially for certain students. And then academically, I think the broadest way to describe what is happening is achievement gaps or opportunity gaps are becoming chasms. And so across across the board, kids have really been struggling to kind of keep up with things like math skills, but some parents have managed to find ways to do tutoring, fill gaps, keep kids on track pretty well, while other kids have just really spiraled academically. So it's a bit of a crisis. We're seeing a lot of variation, I guess is the best way to understand it. And different kids, of course, are reacting differently. But for those kids who are struggling, it's really serious, and really every week matters for what we do on their behalf.
That social, emotional, or mental health factor, what can be done with it, get done about it now, and what do schools need to do as, let us hope, normal life begins to return?
Well, if there's a silver lining to this pandemic, I think there are some. It's a strong realization that kids' social and emotional welfare really matter, and if they're not attended to, can be real barriers to academic learning. And so we're seeing through surveys of school districts that this is really on their radar. District leaders, school principals, educators are all saying that this is a fundamental challenge that we have to attend to. And we're also seeing some really interesting creative approaches being brought into play. Many of the school districts that we're tracking are doing things like student surveys, just, a quick pulse. How are you doing? If you have need to talk to an adult, you can kind of virtually raise your hand and somebody will get in touch with you, check in with you. There's been a lot of emphasis on relationship building, advisories, those kinds of things. I guess the thing that is in front of us that I think is going to be a continued challenge is with this new realization, and also understanding that schools are constrained financially and in terms of their expertise. How are we going to figure out how to make sure that kids can get what they need without overwhelming schools to have to try to do all of that on their own? So I get kind of excited about some of the interesting innovations that are starting to pop up around learning hubs and pods, where community-based organizations are really coming in and providing those kinds of supports for kids, and still, connecting to the schooling program. But that for me is one of those great opportunities on the horizon, is how can we pull those levers more effectively than we have in the past?
I'm going to jump ahead from what I was planning to say. Are there good things that are going to come out of this? You say, some fresh thinking about how to support kids emotionally, educationally, whatever. Are there good things that are being launched or created?
Sure. I mean, I think there are. Look, nobody would wish this upon us again, but it happened, and it forced a lot of questioning of assumptions that probably should have been questioned before. Because while we know kids are not okay right now, we also know that they weren't okay pre-pandemic, that there were a lot of problems that we were struggling to address. So yes, I think social emotional learning, I think in terms of academic supports, there's a lot of important discussion and strategies being deployed about ways to address lost learning time that just makes so much sense. And I wonder why we didn't consider them before. But for example, zeroing in on the most critical skill gaps kids have and addressing them in the moment through the use of tutoring or interventions that we know work for kids. But doing that in real time, giving kids challenge and addressing holes as they're going, personalizing instruction so that every kid has kind of a personalized education plan, and things are happening to meet this individual student need rather than the need of 40 kids at the same time. Mastery-based learning, our kids actually mastering the skills rather than just moving through the curriculum, all of those things. And then I think it's clear that districts are saying that technology is revealing that many of the approaches that they're using to virtual education weren't the greatest, and they needed to kind of step up their game, and they're glad that they did. but that also technology has allowed them to do some things for kids that they never imagined possible before, and to engage with families in ways that they didn't think were possible before. So just to give you a concrete example, some schools have been experimenting with doing courses for kids that are individualized to their need and use the best teachers in the country to be able to deliver that instruction. And so kind of using a master teacher to teach a lecture to hundreds and hundreds of kids, but then providing individualized support for those kids to make sure they're really getting it. There's a lot. So, right now, I think the challenge before us is, as we all desperately want schools to be fully reopened again, things to get back to normal, how do we capture those things that seem to be working, at least for some kids, and make sure that they don't go away as we move back into the normal?
Well, let's turn to that schools in person question. I understand it's controversial. I wonder what would make me think that. What's your perspective on what is going on nationwide? I believe it's still about 50-50 as far as kids in person and kids not in person, especially urban versus non-urban. You're on the West Coast. All the major cities at least are still not in person. Milwaukee's not in person. The largest cities in Wisconsin are not in person. What's your reading on what's going on and what ought to go on?
Yeah.
Should add one. We just started in Wisconsin wide vaccination of teachers today, as we're recording this on Monday, the 1st of March.
We're at a very interesting point where, there is a lot of pressure for schools to reopen, those that are still closed. Many have been open since last August with very little incident, but as you say, real variation, urban versus suburban versus rural, and West Coast versus East. I'm on the West Coast, and here in Seattle Public Schools, kids have not been physically in school for a year now. So, the tension is building, and we're really in a situation where it's parents are losing patience. We're seeing more and more protests around the country, parents organizing to reopen schools. It's been far too political, in my view. I spoke to some research colleagues in Europe at the beginning of the pandemic, and they said, oh, well, our politicians at the national level really just said, we're going to keep politics out of the school discussion, and we're going to buffer them from it. We're just going to follow science there and make sure the kids don't have to pay the price of all the other stuff. And they said, why is it so crazy in the US with the politics? And I think what happened is local politics take hold in a vacuum, and we had a bit of a leadership vacuum around how to manage the school reopening situation. So here we are. Science hopefully will begin to be the more powerful dynamic, but in the meantime, we've got to figure out how to get schools open. The new CDC guidance is somewhat helpful, but we've still got political fights ahead. And, just a continued wild card, I think, is that the variants are expected to, really change the dynamic of local community health across the country. So much remains to be seen on that front. I think the underlying tension, Alan, is a trust issue. Families who are scared to send their kids back, teachers who are afraid as well. And when there's fundamental mistrust, there is political tension. That's what we've got. And in my view, what that calls for is very, very strong local, state, and federal leadership and strong guidance from scientists to reassure people and insist that we follow the science on the benefit of kids.
There's groups within the whole school population that particularly concern me. One of them is special ed kids. What's your reading on what's going on that front nationwide?
It's been a complete disaster for kids with special needs, just a complete disaster. I am follow a number of Facebook pages for parents, kids with special needs, and those families have just been in complete despair. Some of them, it took months before they even heard from their child's teacher. I mean, it was literally months before they heard anything about what was happening. Many haven't received in-person therapies for a year now, and the social isolation is so difficult for so many of them. It's also the case that those kids oftentimes struggle with, the things like keeping masks on at school. And so it's been a real challenge, an extraordinary crisis. I think that we've got to consider for those kids in particular some real compensation in terms of time in schools when things get back to normal, so that they can be given what they're legally entitled to, compensatory services and supports. So yeah, it's been, that's one population that just keeps me up at night worrying about how they're doing and how we're going to make things better for them.
Another would be preschool kids, not only 4 or 5-year-old kindergartners, but younger than that.
Yes. So we've seen, the trends across the country are the families who have completely opted out of sending their kids back to school are oftentimes the really littlest kids. Families who've decided, my child was supposed to start kindergarten this year, but I'm just not going to do it. So they're just delaying entry. What that means for the school system is interesting, because we'll probably get double the number of kindergartners in some places next year, a flood of little kids needing to be educated, and we'll have to figure that out. But it's also going to set back kids' literacy gains for some time. On the silver linings front, however, I will say that those are the kids and the families who tend to be participating in pods, some kind of just, getting a small number of kids together, letting them play and explore, go out in the woods and explore the city in new ways. And, I think it's an interesting opportunity to learn from those folks about what those kids really experienced that was great in those small learning communities, those little kids, and how we can carry that forward in early childhood education.
And then there's the kids, mostly I think I'd say middle school and high school kids, who have just disappeared, haven't been heard from since last March. I've seen claims that there may be as many as 3 million nationally. It leaves me speechless, as you can see. What do we do about those kids?
Yeah, we are seeing numbers. Boston Globe published something recently about maybe something around 40 or 50% of junior and seniors chronically absent right now. I will say, as a researcher, it's hard to make sense of the stability of those numbers and what they really mean, because the kids are not showing up to their classes, but have they transferred to a different setting? Have they just gone missing? What's going on with those kids? That's where we just don't have good information about what's happening. But, worst case scenario is they've just dropped out of school. They've looked at the economy, they've looked at their family needs and decided they have to go to work, or they're in trouble, they're on the streets, or, something's going on with them. We know there are at least, great numbers of those kids. So some communities have mounted all possible resources to go out and track down every one of those chronically absent kids, get in touch with their families if possible, go through city agencies to try to track them down in every means possible, just an all-out campaign to find those kids, get in touch with them, get them re-engaged in learning. Last thought I've had is in some of those cities, Milwaukee may be one of them, the number of chronically absent kids was not that far off from what the numbers are right now. I mean, that's the thing that I think we have to keep in mind and keep asking ourselves, as we try to hunt down these kids, re-engage them, what was it about schooling and what is it about schooling that they really hate so much that they're willing to just throw it all aside? And can we use this moment to go to them and say, hey, what would be exciting to you? Can we build something that would give you your degree and be exciting and meaningful to you, and do things differently in this moment rather than dragging you back into something that you hate? That feels like a good opportunity to me.
The state of teaching and teachers, the whole teaching core. This hasn't been an easy time for teachers either. In fact, maybe harder than for a lot of the kids. What's your assessment of the nationwide picture?
Yeah, it's been an extraordinary ask of them to manage all of this without very much guidance. I mean, I think that's the thing that really breaks my heart, is how little support teachers have gotten typically around just, how to do virtual learning well, or how to manage your time load. We've asked teachers to just, kind of move through this crisis on autopilot without any additional supports and staying in the box of what they've always done. Now, some districts have kind of tried to shift things up and said, let's not ask our teachers to teach everything this year, but let's zero in on the most critical skills that kids need to progress to the next grade level. And let's let the other things slide right now. Maybe keep some of the fun stuff, but then zero in on the fundamental math skills and literacy and things like that. So I feel badly that we haven't done that more typically for teachers. It is leading to burnout, stress, and the numbers are concerning about how many teachers are considering retiring early or moving on to a different profession. I hate to be sort of the perennial silver lining gal, but maybe this is a good time to think about, well, can we shift things up and allow teachers to really specialize in what they're the very best at? Some teachers say that they love virtual learning. They excel at it. They just would love to do it full time. And I think we need to get a lot more strategic about how we leverage teacher interest and talent and get them into the kinds of teaching that they are best at and can be successful at.
Well, the name of your center is a Center on Reinventing Public Education. How do we go about reinventing public education after a year in which things have taken such an extraordinary beating?
There is a lot of reinventing to do, and nobody is going to know exactly what the right path is going forward right now. So, as a good researcher, I guess I would say the thing to do right now is to observe and track what families, students, educators, district leaders are realizing in this moment that they like. What have they chosen? How have they unbundled learning and rebundled it in interesting ways? How have they set priorities for what's most important to them? So we're trying to do some of that tracking right now. We're studying the pod and hub movement to that end. And then we've got to start kind of building models for what seems plausible for addressing kids' emotional mental health needs and catching them up quickly in a time when we're probably going to be more and more constrained financially, have more and more talent challenges in front of us, what are some of those creative approaches that people are trying, experimenting with? What seems to be working? So, in my mind, the next 2 years, probably longer, are going to be a time when we need to commit to an R&D strategy, getting really clear about what's being tried, what's most effective, and trying to move those things as fast as possible. But, as you know, Alan, that is harder than it seems in public education. We've really struggled to get that right, and there are reasons for it. There are political and governance reasons that we'll have to come to terms with.
Is there something that we're not paying enough attention to, that we're overlooking or minimizing, that's actually really important? Anything come to mind in that vein to you?
The really powerful conversations that I've had in the past several months have come from families who have taken this pause to do something that they felt was really lacking for their kids. In many of those conversations, the topic has been racial affirmation. And I think, in the course of the pandemic, for so many families of color, the pain and angst that their kids are feeling about racial identity is very, very real, and something they're trying to help them through. And they're afraid that as things kind of snap back to normal, we're going to, all that exciting work that they've been doing to find really wonderful curriculum for their kids, to, craft pods or hubs that are really strengthening how kids understand their place in the world, will be lost. They're afraid of that. And I think that's a really important conversation that is not part of what people are talking about in the reopening debates at all. But for families of color, that's what I'm hearing from them is, learning loss is real and something they want people talking about. They want to make sure that their kids are accelerated, not just brought back to normal when it comes to learning, but they also want us to take very seriously where we are with race in this country and how we're going to deal with it. So, it's a really important conversation, and it adds to the challenge of what we do when we return to normal, how much we listen to students and families about what they need and take that seriously before we jump in and start trying to craft solutions for them.
Would you care to venture a guess or urge what should be done if we run the clock ahead to September and we're starting a new school year? What's going to be going on, and what do we do about this whole mess of a year that's behind us now?
I wish I could say I think it's behind us, but I think...
Well, I say we're at the 1 year mark. No, it's not over. I don't.
Yeah. I mean, I think, for many school districts, there's good likelihood that there'll be hybrid instruction next year until all kids are vaccinated. So we'll see. I think, what's killed me since the beginning of the pandemic is the lack of urgency and the lack of creative solutions that we're hearing about. So, I would like people right now to be thinking about how to use summer effectively, and not just in terms of catching kids up academically, but getting kids to heal and to form friendships and bonds again, and to make sure they're okay and do checks on them, so that when it comes to September, we are in a much better place with them. They have had some attention, they have had some work, and we can hit the ground running. I mean, if I were running a school district in September, God forbid, I guess I would be thinking about, look, our fiscal resources are going to be more and more constrained, and our talent pool is probably going to be more and more constrained. And so how can I look out in the community and think about who can help? Who can help address kids' needs in a variety of different ways through academic tutoring, through mental health services, and to do a whole kind of civic mapping and leverage those resources, bring them to the table, think about using space continuously throughout next year to do small group instruction, because that's what kids are going to need. Just go big on creative use of resources.
Lack of urgency and lack of creativity are two things that would never be appropriate accusations against the Center on Reinventing Public Education at the University of Washington or Robin Lake, which means talking to you is very worthwhile, and your observations going back now for a year and here in this session are really worth paying attention to. So I want to thank you for taking some time out to talk with us, and maybe we'll check in again sometime again, because it ain't over. I agree with that. But I really appreciate your willingness to be part of this program. We're going to make a transition here at this point. I want to thank Robin Lake once again, and momentarily Mike Gousha will be here with several of the really worthwhile listening to local school leaders. So thank you. I'm glad to be part of this myself.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alan, and thanks to Robin Lake for that really interesting conversation. We're going to continue the conversation now by talking with 4 leading educators from the Metro Milwaukee area. I'll introduce them in alphabetical order in this case. Matt Joynt is the superintendent of schools for the Mequon-Thiensville School District. He has been in that post since 2017. He has been a teacher, an administrator, and a superintendent since 1999. Jennifer Lopez has been the CEO of the Carmen Schools of Technology and Science since 2019. She is the head of a network of 5 charter schools with more than 2,000 students in them. Jennifer Lopez was previously the chief academic officer at St. Anthony School in Milwaukee, and she's worked for several schools and education organizations in her native California and here in Milwaukee. Keith Posley is the superintendent of the Milwaukee Public Schools, a job he's held since 2018. He has been an MPS teacher, a principal, and an administrator since the early 1990s. And Jim Sebert became Waukesha school superintendent in June of last year. He has been a teacher and school leader since 1996. And prior to becoming the head of the Waukesha schools, he was the head of the Fond du Lac school system. Thanks to the 4 of you for being with us today.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you for having us.
So what I'd like to do is begin by having you talk about the current school year, what it's looked like for you, where you are today. We all know what happened a year ago. People had to scramble. We had to figure things out on the fly. But now we've had another year come, and it's presented its own set of challenges. And so I wondered if each of you would just take a very brief moment or two to tell us exactly what model you've been using in your school district and where you are today with students in terms of in-person versus virtual learning. I'll begin again in alphabetical order. We'll start with Superintendent Joynt.
Thanks, Mike. The Mequon-Thiensville School District began the year at the onset of September completely virtual, and after that first week transitioned into offering our families the option of both in-person or distance learning. That on-campus learning began on September 7th, and we have been in it ever since. We have had to utilize throughout the year in navigating the pandemic intermittent closures at the classroom, grade level, or school level, but have been successful in maintaining that option of on-campus learning for our families. About 75% of our families are taking advantage of that, while the other 25% are taking advantage of the distance learning opportunities that we're providing.
That's great, thanks. Jennifer Lopez, how about with Carmen?
Sure. So similarly, what we found in Milwaukee is that we kept a close eye on the community transmission rates for the zip codes that our students live in. And what we noticed is that we had high positivity rates, upwards of even 40%. So that is why we made the decision early on to be virtual, and that we would improve our virtual learning platform. And so that's what we did, launched the school year virtually, and then have now moved towards having a small subset of students in school learning and getting additional support.
Will you anticipate those numbers growing through the remainder of the school year, or is there just a kind of a limit that you're going to put on it for this school year?
Yeah, we hope to bring back additional students in the next couple of weeks to be able to serve additional students for the remainder of the school year, recognizing that it's been incredibly challenging to be in a remote space, but also have been someone that is, leading through equity and recognizing that we do not want any of our families to be impacted by this virus, recognizing that it's disproportionately impacted students of color and low-income communities.
Superintendent Posley, I'll ask you the same question. You've been virtual really since this all began. Where are you today with MPS?
Thank you, Mike. Yes, we launched the school year in a total virtual setting with had plans in place, a phased in approach to phase into phase 2 and then to phase 3. But with this whole thing around community spread, we have been in a virtual setting. And we have now opened on February 8th open up 3 campuses for some of our students, as well as we have plans in place to reopen starting April 12th, which will go from kindergarten through 2nd grade, and then on April 19th with 3 through 8th grade, and April 26th for 9 through 12th grade pending board approval. We're going to be coming back to the board in March, early March, to kind of talk through that particular piece as well.
Will there still be a virtual option in that scenario?
Yes, we will have a virtual option throughout the entire school year for individual families that desire to do that.
Superintendent Sebert, what about Waukesha?
Thank you, Mike. At the elementary level, we began the year with full face-to-face opportunities, as well as our School District of Waukesha virtual program, and we also have our eAchieve virtual charter school available. And at the secondary level, we started the year in a 2-day hybrid for middle school and high school. We transitioned to a 4-day hybrid, then back to a 2-day hybrid. And now since the beginning of the second semester, on January 25th, we now have full 5 days of face-to-face as an option, as well as the eAchieve option for secondary students. So at this time, all of our kids K-12 are in school full-time if they choose to be.
So let's talk about how this is working. And I think the big question most people have is academic achievement. There's not a lot of data right now in the state of Wisconsin that tells us what precisely is happening here, but we have heard from other places around the country that this is a school year that's marked by perhaps less education progress than would be in a typical year, that perhaps students of color, low-income students, have been hardest by this. Our prior guest just said that the educational achievement gaps we have become achievement chasms. She said it's been a tough year. So I'm wondering how your students are faring. And I'll begin here in kind of a different order. I'll begin with Superintendent Posley, because the superintendent, your district has probably the greatest percentage of kids who are low income or minority. Carmen may also be part of that. But I'll begin with yours. how are the kids doing in MPS?
Thank you, Mike. One of the things I ask on a daily basis, how are the children? And one of the things that my declaring call that I want to be able to receive, that the children are doing well. And one of the things that we're looking at is to make sure that I first want to put out there, nothing can replace face-to-face instruction. We totally know that. But I would also say that our children are learning in a virtual platform. And it's been exciting to see to visit classrooms and see the things that young people are doing and to move the academic needle, to move forward. But also looking at how we have to make sure that the learning environment is conducive as far as trying to find those face-to-face opportunities where young people can have an opportunity through the social and emotional learning platform to be able to interact and engage with one another. But looking at all of the different things such as classroom-based assessments, looking at test results and things of that nature that young people are doing on a daily basis, and looking at the growth. But I will be the first to say, is growth where we want it to be? But I would say the answer would be no, but it's growth in progress. And I just want to make it, perfectly clear that young people are actively engaged in learning. And we have seen some young people truly blossom from the virtual setting. But we want to make sure that all students are moving in the right direction.
Have you seen, Superintendent Posley, change in grades? Are more kids struggling? Are you seeing more kids failing a specific course? What are you seeing on that front?
Well, it's the first marking period we saw that there was an increase in failures. But we have been working with our teachers, our leaders, principals around this, and I'm excited to say that that paradigm has shifted, and we are seeing a growth process. And I think a lot of it had to do with the virtual learning platform being new in some cases, especially at the elementary level. But now that this is a way of life, and young people have come more accustomed to this platform, and teachers have just really jumped in there, and administrators to support our young people and build those safety nets so that our young people can be successful. And we are having a lot of individuals, working with our young people, building those safety nets around our young people in order that those failure rates is now trending downward. And I'm happy to say that we've cut them almost in half around failure rates. So excited about where we're going around that, but it was just the idea, I think, of coming together and building those safety nets around young people in order for them to be successful.
Jennifer Lopez, in Carmen schools, about 70% Latino, about 30% African-American kids, a number of them low-income kids. How are they doing? How much progress have they lost, or have they lost any progress?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. So we have about 90% of our students who qualify for a free or reduced lunch program. So students from low-income backgrounds. And one thing that we did, and I am very proud of what my team was able to accomplish, on March 13th, we physically closed down our buildings. On March 16th, we pivoted almost literally overnight into a virtual learning platform. And what we learned very quickly within that first week span of closures, we connected with all 2,300 of our families and learned very soon that many of our families had already lost a reduction of wages or had lost their jobs. So we created an emergency relief fund to quickly deploy funds to help support our students and our families, because recognizing in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if the foundation is not met in terms of basic needs, our students couldn't learn. So what has been really special about Carmen is that we have an advisory program where our students are connecting with their teachers on a daily basis. And that has surfaced for us in terms of the challenges that our students are encountering. What we've been able to adopt, recognizing that in the fall of 2020, we recognized that virtual learning was going to be we were going to be going into some kind of virtual learning platform, not recognizing that we were going to do full virtual in August. So what we adopted were specific instructional programs in which we could have a better pulse in terms of how our students were doing instructionally. So what we have been able to adopt is actually gather data on a daily basis in terms of whether our students are mastering grade level content. So what we have been able to quickly see is that we made a hypothesis in terms of what we presumed our students would be losing in terms of academic locks, given virtual learning and given the studies we were seeing through NWEA. Quite frankly, we didn't see that gap. Not to the extent that NWA had slated. So that's something that I'm proud of our team. And I think that by the time that we launched in September, that was 4.0 version of our virtual learning platform. And we've only refined and made it stronger. So I'm proud of in terms of what we've been able to accomplish in this virtual learning space. Admittedly, in-person learning, I agree, Dr. Posley, nothing takes away from that in-person learning. We do have students who are thriving in this virtual learning space, but quite frankly, I would ideally have wanted to start the school year in person, but recognizing that this had just impacted our communities in just disproportional ways, we simply couldn't do that in good conscience.
Superintendent Sebert, I know you've heard from some parents who say we're concerned that more kids are struggling, that they're having a hard time in this last year, and that things are different. How would you assess the performance, the academic achievement of students in the Waukesha schools?
Sure. So looking at our map data that Jennifer was talking about, our kids essentially maintained their reading levels, but we did take some slight regression in the mathematics area. So we're aware of that. Similarly, we did have in the first quarter, we had more kids failing classes than we had in previous school years. And so we've had to really look at how are we wrapping around kids differently when we were in some of these different learning models. And how are we making sure that they have the social, emotional, as well as academic support to be successful? And so I'm very proud of the staff and the way they've worked at that. I'd also have to say that since we've been back in school, to see the excitement, to see the levels of engagement, they've skyrocketed, and they're different than I've ever seen before. And it's almost as if, we take for granted going to school every day in the past. And now when we have the opportunity to go to school when we haven't for quite some time, it really has been incredible to watch. And so I'm very confident that as both Keith and Jennifer have said, in-person learning is what we know is best. And I'm confident that our kids are going to continue to improve and do better with the support of our staff going forward.
Superintendent Joynt, I'll ask you the same question. You have a little bit of a different district in terms of the socioeconomic status of a lot of your parents and the kids. What have you seen in Mequon-Thiensville? How have the students performed under these somewhat trying conditions?
Yeah, I think it's the most important question we can ask. I can appreciate where Dr. Posley asks on a daily basis, how are the children doing? And I am constantly finding myself having to remind my team and our community and those that we work with that we are managing and navigating a pandemic. So when we ask that question, the context includes that everybody is in a pandemic. I love the news stories where people are thriving in it, but we really are working to survive the pandemic. Like Jim noted and Jennifer noted, we're using the NWEA MAP assessments, and I'm certainly proud to report that in our school districts, like Jim's, our students have maintained, when we look at our performance based on national percentile, we've maintained there as a school district. But you have to consider the fact that the whole nation is navigating that pandemic. And so like what Keith shared, we're seeing some student growth, but we're not seeing the level of student growth that we've seen in the past pre-pandemic. We're seeing more absenteeism in our school district, just like everybody else is, as we manage the pandemic. We're seeing more social emotional needs of our children as well. And so all of the challenges that are shared by the others here are the same challenges that we're experiencing across the nation. And Mequon-Thiensville is part of having to navigate those challenges too.
I'll just ask, any of you can answer this question. Do any of you feel that special steps have to be taken to address any ground that was lost during the pandemic? In other words, extended summer school, large-scale tutoring programs. Does anybody feel that that's something we're looking at because of what we've experienced over the last year? Anybody can weigh in here.
I'll jump in here, Mike. That is something that we have spent countless hours of looking at. And here we usually have a 4-week summer sessions, 2 sessions of 4-week summer session. This year, we have bumped it up to 6 weeks and 2 sessions with an ample number of different program strategies, looking at a strategy similar to College for Kids to try to get more young people actively engaged in the learning process and trying to pull more students into our settings. Over the summer, we have to address learning loss. I'm looking at working with partners around wraparound services that could provide social and emotional learning, tutoring services, and those kinds of things. Looking at how do we provide compensatory services for all of our young people, and looked at our last set of tests to look at students that may have fallen into basic and minimal, and also making sure that is something mandatory for them, like summer school and things of that nature, and how that we can push more teachers into those settings as well, because we're going to need a whole lot of educators to wrap their arms around young people over the summer and have a real robust summer program, but also take that into the upcoming school year to provide those same safety nets for young people, extended after school hours, things of that nature, as well as wraparound support and ongoing tutoring to make sure that our children are where they need to be.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that question, whether or not we need to do more in the way of summer school, whether we need to do big tutoring programs? Anybody else on that?
Sure, I can. So last summer, I adopted the National Summer School Initiative, for our students. And we opened that up for all 3 educational sectors. We opened it up for Carmen teachers and also for teachers across the different ed sectors in Milwaukee as well to be a part of it. And I think that was incredibly beneficial because those were actually our strongest teachers come fall timeframe, because we had the strongest teachers that served as mentor teachers to help support, provide daily professional development and a rigorous curriculum that was culturally relevant. I think that what was helpful last year as well is that I was able to secure some of our alums to come back to serve as tutors and mentors and supports for our students who are struggling the most. And we created a partnership with my alma mater at Occidental College to provide undergrad students who are seeking to go into the educational field to help support our seniors with one-on-one support and tutoring and mentorship as well. What I'm hoping for this summer is to, again, bring back my alums to serve as those mentors, particularly for our students. I'm concerned, quite frankly, that our students who have struggled and need course recovery, credit recovery, are the students that are also working to help support their families right now. So they're working to help support, to pay for rent, to pay for groceries for their families. So ideally, and I would love for us to be able to find funding in which we could pay for our students to get credit recovery, recognizing that students that are most in need are the ones that are needing to come to summer school this year. So that's what I'm hoping that we can do as a city. I've seen some schools across the country come together and pool resources to help support, recognizing again, our students of color are having to take on additional responsibilities because of the fact that this has impacted their families in such a disproportional manner.
You know, each of you has touched on this, I think, already, and I do want to, we're talking about academic achievement, and obviously that is crucial to the mission of any school district. But these are kids, and they have social and emotional needs, and their worlds have been changed in a dramatic way. Superintendent Sebert, how are the students in Waukesha coping with this? How do you think they're doing?
Well, I think overall, we have a number of success stories, and we also have stories that are sad, and kids that have had a hard time, families that have had a hard time making it through this pandemic period. And that is, again, where none of us have ever been through this. And so we've been trying to figure out, how do you build during these hybrid times, how do you build classroom community via a Zoom or via a WebEx? And how do you find ways to connect with kids and make them feel part of that classroom family and classroom community that every great teacher creates, that's so powerful and is the foundation of learning flourishing in a classroom? So there have been challenges with those pieces, without a doubt. I do feel as if since we have been back in school and being in school at the elementary the entire time, we have been able to address some of those pieces. And overall, I'm just so proud of my staff, because it's one of those times in which in your life, we all felt like we were brand new, like we had very limited experience, because none of us have ever been through anything quite like this. And so it's a very vulnerable feeling, but our teachers have been just incredible warriors, and they've been dedicated on an incredible level to making this process be as smooth as possibly can be, and really meeting the needs of kids at every single level, whether it is academic, social, or emotional.
Superintendent Joynt, you read stories about students who are, they're just worn out. They're tired of this. They miss their friends in the way they used to be able to spend time with friends, and that they've made this whole long journey together. Did that journey take a toll? I mean, even if you go back in person as you were doing, did it take a toll on those students?
Well, yes, absolutely. And at the same time, there are really bright spots where we find children have been resourceful and figured out ways to connect more virtually in ways that as adults we never would have imagined, and in really healthy ways as well. But I think, Mike, even when we talk about virtual versus in person, our on-campus options look very different than what they did before. We have students at their desks behind plastic dividers. We have students in cohorts where they don't leave their homeroom and travel to their specials. They're spending recess in the elementary schools with their homeroom class and not with the full grade level. So The answer is not just to be in person. We have a lot of work to do to continue to work with our health officials to determine what mitigation measures are working and what ones can be relaxed as we continue to navigate the pandemic so that we can establish further sense of normalcy and opportunities for our children to connect with one another as well as other adults.
Superintendent Posley, how's the mental health of the students in MPS? How are they doing?
Well, our social and emotional learning piece is big, and we are doing everything that we possibly can to build those safety nets. We have also repurposed a number of our staff, our school psychologists, our social workers, our trauma-informed care, our counselors, and paras, safeties, everyone with focusing in on a cohort of students and working through that and making sure that they are, getting what they need, as well as looking at other opportunities to provide virtual opportunities to have, we even now have instituted virtual recess so that young people can get a chance to talk and interact with their classmates. And everything that we do on a normal face-to-face piece, we have flipped it over to a virtual platform. We also have office hours for our teachers where individuals can drop in to have those needed conversations around work and various things that they want to talk about. All of our clubs and activities are still going on as well to make sure that we have, all of our virtual clubs that we have that meet after school, such as forensics and things of that nature. They're still meeting, still doing those kinds of things, debate teams, as well as our bands and various groups are pulling together, and we have all pushed this into a virtual platform to meet our students' needs around that particular piece, but also that near peer mentoring that needs to happen. Those kinds of things are taking place. So just making sure that our children have all of those built-in safety nets when it comes to that social and emotional learning, because we all get to a point that we want to be able to go out and shake someone's hand or to spend time with them and those kinds of things. And our students are facing some of those same things that are, that is paramount around all districts around the country.
And CEO Lopez at Carmen, how are your students doing with addressing sort of the mental toll that this pandemic can take on all of us?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think the mental health aspect is something that we anticipated being something of concern arising further, given the isolation that our students are experiencing, given the fact that there's just toxic stress that our students are navigating through their families and their homes and so forth. So we've been really, and hearing from our families directly that is a priority area that they want us to focus our attention in helping support with additional resources, recognizing there aren't enough bilingual mental health providers to provide our students and our families with the services that they need and deserve. But we've been able to actively create a partnership with 16th Street Clinic to ensure that we have mental health provider that is coming to our schools and launching in August of 2021. So we will have a satellite of services provided at every one of our campuses, recognizing that our students are going to come back to us with a lot of mental health needs, given what we're hearing already from our advisors, from our teachers, from our administrators, our school leaders, and from our families and students directly. So that is something that we have been actively working towards to provide additional resources, recognizing that we do not have enough right now to provide the support that our students need.
I want to talk about how the teachers are doing, because they have had to really be creative and persistent. And I mean, the challenges facing the people who teach our kids have been enormous. I'll ask each of you the same question. How are your teachers holding up? Are teachers saying, this has been so long, I'm thinking about maybe retiring, I'm thinking about doing something else? I'll go right down the list here. We'll start with Superintendent Sebert again. How have the Waukesha teachers handled this?
I'm exceptionally proud of our teachers here in Waukesha. They have really, really went above and beyond to work through this. Not to say it hasn't come without challenges, but one of the things that we tried to do is step back a little bit from some of our traditional district goals and say, let's really focus on social and emotional well-being. And that means you, as well as you and your kids. And let's really focus on our Blackboard and our digital learning platforms and strengthen those, because we know we're going to need them. And so we've tried to just really put the emphasis where it needs to be in order to take care of people so they can take care of the kids. And overall, they certainly are working very, very hard and deserve a tremendous amount of credit. And I'm very grateful that our community recognizes that, our parents recognize that, our board recognizes that, and we're just very proud of them.
Superintendent Posley, the teachers have had to adapt, just like the rest of us. How have they done, and how are they holding up given some of the new stresses that they face?
I will truly say that our teachers have been truly amazing on working with our young people. We started off with this whole piece around professional development, all the professional development activities that they have to go through this summer, as well as to get prepared for virtual learning, and the ongoing and how they have teamed up and worked with one another to help provide ongoing professional development and share best practices with one another, looking at how they can be creative in a virtual setting to take what you do in the regular face-to-face brick and mortar and take it and do all of those same things in a virtual setting. Our young people have not skipped a beat on any of the things that they have not been able to do, such as field trips. They got virtual field trips. They have made virtual museums and zoo trips and just a number of different things, and how they have supported one another through this whole thing around self-care and sharing with one another that particular way, and being an advocate for our young people, standing in the gap to make sure that young people are receiving what they need. They have gone over and beyond as far as supplies and getting supplies to homes, and to support our young people as that's needed. This has just been truly amazing, and it's going over and beyond the call of duty on a daily basis to support our young people and their families, because also they have had to work and help provide that support for families and build in that support that's needed along the way.
CEO Lopez, give me an idea of how the Carmen faculty, how the teachers are doing in terms of this very unusual, challenging year.
It certainly has been probably the most challenging year in educational history, but I am incredibly impressed with my team, from my school teachers to my administrators, my school leaders, to my network team, of just really rallying behind to help support one another, support our entire Carmen community, our students, our families, and our staff. And I know that it hasn't been easy, but we've been gathering the data and the voices really of all of our staff on a weekly basis to do pulse checks in terms of how they were doing and provide additional support. My director of HR has been phenomenal in providing additional resources for self-care and mental health support for our staff, because it has been challenging. And I am super impressed with the fact that our teachers have been so creative in a time of just challenge, and continue to persist and do whatever it's possible to provide the best education possible for our students, to fulfill on our promise to our students and our families, to graduate our students who are prepared for college and success in careers as well.
Superintendent Joynt, Mequon-Thiensville, how are the teachers doing through all of this?
I don't think anybody could have predicted how hard this year was going to be, even as we navigated last spring with the full closure and got into summer and started looking ahead and coming to the realizations that this full school year was going to look very different. Mike, when you think about some of the barriers to change, what stands in your way, that lack of information, a void in professional development and the skills that you're going to have to use on the job, and a fear of the unknown, those are just gigantic mountains in the way of positive change. And our educators, our staff here in the district have all navigated them. And there has been bumps and hiccups along the way, but they have stayed positive and they have stayed focused on the children. And I just couldn't be prouder.
I wanted to ask each of you about I guess you call it the politics of all of this. As we know, there's a lot of discussion about whether kids should be attending in-person classes, whether they should be going virtual. Many people have different opinions about that. From your standpoint, how challenging has that been to all of the other things that are going on? Because you can find sometimes where it seems like groups are pitted against each other. And so I'm very curious to see from your perspective how this has played out politically, controversially. I'll begin with Superintendent Joynt on that one. I know there were some protests early in last summer about, hey, we want our kids in class. What's it been like in your district in terms of whether or not it's had any long-term consequences for relationships between teachers, parents, administrators?
Well, I think that's a tremendous question as well. You asked how the teachers are, how the employees are. The effect of politics and how it interplays with schools in the pandemic has affected our teachers and our staff as well. It is part of what has created the increased tension and anxiousness as our employees, our teachers have worked to meet student needs. And to be honest with you, Mike, when I look back at the pandemic one day, it will be the area that I will say I am most disappointed. If you'd asked me a year ago about education and its place in politics, I would have proudly told you that I was a superintendent in an era where education again became the middle rail and brought the right and left together. And here, 1 year later, as we come up on March and the school closure, it's the opposite. Education has become a place that the right and left work to grab and use against one another. And I think it's really unfortunate, because if there is something to come together around, it's our children and it's our future. And that's the role that education plays. So I'll be honest in answering the question. The politics related to the pandemic and what schools should or shouldn't look like from the perspective of others is the part that has disappointed me the most.
Superintendent Sebert, have any relationships been damaged through this process? I mean, whether it is between parents, administrators, principals, teachers, whatever, have the relationships been fundamentally changed because of what has happened in the last year?
I don't know if I can say they've been fundamentally changed. I think they've been strained at times. And I think it really is, it comes down to there's been no easy decisions that we've been able to make, because we're trying to balance the needs of multiple stakeholders, and within those stakeholder groups, multiple perspectives, as Matt was pointing to. And so overall, our parents have been great. They've been very supportive. They've advocated for their children and what they'd like to see for their children. And they've been very supportive of our staff. But it is fair to say that it has been a tumultuous time, and that there has been strain on relationships. But I do believe that as we get closer and closer and turn the corner on this with vaccines and continuing to see case rates go down, we're certainly not out of the woods, but we are making progress. The sun that's out today doesn't hurt either. There's a lot of things going in our favor. And to the extent that we can rebuild some of those connections, I think it's going to be critical to getting back to whatever the new normal looks like.
Jennifer Lopez, does all of what we've experienced feel too politicized to you? How do you read that?
Admittedly, I think that there's been a number of silver lining, I think, in this pandemic. Personally, I think that we've strengthened our relationship and our trust with our families and our community, given that we connect with them on a regular basis and can connect as we saw this past year, we started the school year with 2,300 students, and we're still at 2,300 students. We haven't seen a decline in enrollment at all. And that speaks volumes in terms of the trust that we've been able to build in our communities with our families, and the trust that they have in us, and the quality of education that we were able to provide. Admittedly, I think that one thing that I do wish is that we would have put the same energy into putting into bars and restaurants and gyms, opening them up and prioritize schools, quite frankly. Education is a passion of mine. And I think that is something that we could have absolutely come together and prioritize our students. And I think that is something that quite frankly, I'm disappointed that we didn't do as a country.
Superintendent Posley, that's a fair question for MPS too, because you've heard from your teachers, from the teachers union, saying, look, there was no vaccine available. You've done polls of your parents, many of whom did not want their kids returning to school. And yet there has been criticism too of saying, why aren't their kids back in school? Why aren't they doing in-person learning? It's a difficult issue to navigate because you're getting lots of different input from many different parties.
Yes, Mike, it is totally difficult. I'm responsible for 72,000 students, over 10,000 employees, and the 72,000 students' families, and over 158 schools, and also in an environment with over 83% poverty index. And looking at what had to happen and what things need to take place, working with buildings that are very old, and looking at this whole technology divide, to go and to make sure that we have hotspots for all of our children with this digital divide that happens over this great state of Wisconsin, but also in a large urban city, to know that there are technology and hotspot deserts in this city, and have to provide those things for our young people. And those kinds of things take money, take time. And you talk about the surveys to find out what type of devices that they would have at home in order to provide each one of our young people with a device and a hotspot so that they can get on to do their work. Also coupled with making sure that our young people have a wholesome meal to eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and those kinds of things, and to find ways to meet all of those needs, and looking at how do you navigate through that. And it has been a up and down journey with politically around that particular piece, to get people to understand, to walk a day in my shoes, to see what we are working with, and how you're able to just flip the switch and say that we are totally virtual, or whatever the situation may be, and bringing a number of individuals around on making sure that we bring everyone around our young people to make sure that they're successful. And when you look at, I think there's been a lot of unfair statements that have been made about where the Milwaukee Public Schools are, where its teachers are. Everyone is given 110% on a daily basis. That, and then going out to homes, making sure that we get students what they need, as far as school supplies, as far as books and things that's needed, taking it to our young people that's all over this great city. But I would say that it's truly have been a labor of love, and we have really gone over and beyond the call of duty to do great things for children and families in this city.
I've got many more questions I'd love to ask, but I want to be respectful of your time. These are busy days for all of you, needless to say. So let me end here with a question about looking ahead. And, the pandemic has forced all of us to reimagine the future, to make changes in what it is we do. And I'm wondering what will be the takeaway from this experience as we begin to emerge, as we begin to get to the other side. Superintendent Joynt, what's the takeaway? Is it that virtual will be a much larger part of our education world? Is it something else? What would be your takeaway as we look forward to how education may have been changed by this pandemic?
I don't know if I can say it's virtual. Certainly the virtual component of it does lend itself to my answer. Mike, I think more than anything else, we have learned the need and ability to be more flexible than we have in the past. And so whether that is our students, our families, our teachers, our administrators, our school board, you name the stakeholder group in the Mequon-Thiensville School District, what we will take away from this pandemic ultimately is the benefit of being flexible and the creative ways to do so, and that there isn't one right answer. For me, education has not changed a lot for a very long time, and I don't know how much it will, but I do know that coming out of this pandemic, we will all feel more skilled at being flexible and using that moving forward.
Jennifer Lopez, that's an interesting answer. Flexibility. It will make us be more flexible as we look at the future. Is that one of the takeaways for you?
Absolutely. I think in being adaptive and how do we do more with what we've been able to surface. So technology right now, the fact that the matter is, I anticipate that we might have staff shortages for summer school this year, given the fact that the reality is this has been the hardest year for our teachers. And that's a possibility. So how do we help support that potential reality? So thinking creatively in terms of, I have 3 high schools, 2 middle schools, and an elementary school. How can I ensure that one teacher can go ahead and teach all of 3 of my high schools in the same content area? That's something that we hadn't thought about previously. And it's something that we can do now. The fact that we've had assemblies with all 2,300 students, we couldn't do that before because we thought about the logistical nightmare of having to put students in buses, and we didn't have the spacing to have 2,300 students in one location. So there's been a lot of silver lining and the adaptability effect of we can connect with families, whether they come to our schools like I am right now, or they can log into our, our parent coffees with the school leaders virtually as well. So there's a lot of things that we can learn at this time, given the fact that it has caused us to be much more flexible and adaptive given the circumstances.
Superintendent Posley, I love the term, there may be a silver lining here. What's the silver lining for you going forward from this pandemic? What did we learn?
One of the things that I would say I learned is grace, compassion, and patience during these unprecedented times. None of us have been prepared and are ready to just jump into this and make things happen. But just how this whole village concept have come together around our children to make sure that we are ready to move forward. The school board, the teachers, parents, the community as a whole, of how and what can we do to support young people. We're just so excited about that and the wonderful things that we've learned from this particular piece with virtual learning and distant learning, and how we can have all of that take place at once, the support and parent conferences, and how we have built a strong community with our parents and our partners around working with our young people. So some of those things have just been just so impressive that it just does your heart well to know that with this type of support, our children can do nothing but be successful.
Superintendent Sebert, I'll give you the final word. You started, as we were saying before the program began, in the middle of the pandemic. You started in June of 2020. What have you learned from this experience that you can use going forward?
Well, just building on what everybody here has said, great words: flexibility, adaptability, getting better technologically, having grace. I reflect a lot, and I think this has been just an unprecedented situation that none of us could have ever anticipated. And we have all done our collective best to educate kids, to support our staff, and ultimately keep people as healthy as possible as we move forward. And so I think if that teaches us anything or gives us anything, another word we could throw in is confidence. Because if we can navigate through this, we have the confidence to continue to get better in public education and education in general for kids into the future.
Those are great answers. Before we go, one thing, and I'll thank all of our guests in just a moment. Before we go, on the subject of education, we're going to be doing another event at Marquette Law School. It'll be posted at 12:15 on March 17th. We'll be talking with the 2 candidates for state school superintendent. Alan Borsuk will be moderating that conversation between Jill Underly and Deb Kerr. So we hope that you'll join us for that at the law school. But mostly, I just want to take a moment to thank everyone. We heard from Alan Borsuk and Robin Lake earlier. We certainly thank them. And we thank our 4 guests today: Matt Joynt, Jennifer Lopez, Keith Posley, and Jim Sebert. Thanks so much for your time. We know these are busy days, but we appreciate you spending some of that day with us. So thank you very much. And thanks to everyone who tuned in today. We'll see you next time right here at the Lubar Center at Marquette Law School.